Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 151 of the Path Podcast. I'm Jason.
Hey, I'm Derrick.
And we are so glad that you have decided to join us on the Path this week. We're continuing on in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. We looked at that middle section of the chapter, verses 6 through 13 yesterday. Just really Paul digging in even more about, hey, Corinthians, you guys got to get it together, because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So, Derrick, give us kind of a flyover of what we talked about yesterday, and then let's dig in on some stuff, handles to hold on to this week.
Yeah, so I kind of took the angle of Paul being like a church consultant. Like we understand that today because, I talked about my how the Lord spoke to me about, church revitalization and helping churches, bring new life and that kind of thing. And so really, Paul, he's seen this church start miraculously, people's lives being changed from out of paganism and all other sorts of things. He's seen God move and work in their midst, but then he gets word that some things are awry. Yeah. And he writes a letter, they respond, and then he writes this letter. We talked about that last week. And so and he even mentions that he's like, I really want to come to you. So he wants to come and address these issues that are leading to really their ineffectiveness as the body because of their disunity. And when we think of church consultants, they're going to come in a lot of times, and this is not all of them, some are really good, and we'll get to the root of the issue, but, in generalities, hey, how's your worship? What can you fix in your worship set? They're going to talk to you about songs that you sing and how it's led and flow of the service, and that's a topic of conversation. That's important. It's something you can't neglect, but,
it's not the main thing.
It's not the main thing, hey, a consultant will come in, they'll listen to someone's preaching, and they'll give you tips on, hey, you can do this better, you can do that better, this didn't make sense, what are you doing here, how's your follow-up, are you calling people to make a decision, all that kind of stuff. Again, all very helpful, doesn't need to be neglected, but not the main thing. A consultant may come in and say, hey, your guest services, first impressions ministry needs to be beefed up. How are you following up with people? What's your kids ministry like? What's your youth ministry like? Yeah. They're going to look at all those things and give you, pieces of information on all of them. And none of those need to be neglected. All that's very important. But that's not what Paul does. Paul tells the Corinthian church something I don't think they had on their radar. Yeah. And I don't think most churches that are ineffective have on their radar. And he says, he comes in, in this little pericope, this little subset of scriptures, just these few verses, he just dives in and says, y'all are arrogant. Yeah. You're arrogant. You're putting certain people's needs over other people. You're arrogant. That's why and basically he's like, that's why I've told you everything I've told you about me and Apollos and Cephas and all this stuff that I just talked about. That's why I'm telling you all this stuff now. And he's like, the whole point of it is you're arrogant. And that's not what we're called to. Yeah. He even uses sarcasm as a tool. In this case, sarcasm, it's hyperbolic. It kind of expands this scenario where you can't help but say, oh yeah, he's trying to make a point here. That's kind of what it does. And so through all of that, he helps them to see, he drills in on not he doesn't just say, hey, you're arrogant, stop it, but then he paints this picture of the opposite of arrogance, the opposite of pride, and that is humility. You got to be humble. Yeah, you got to be humble, and that's really, to say, you said flyover. Kind of the flyover is that if we are going to be a church, doing the things God wants us to do and the way God wants us to do it, it can't be about us. Right. It's got to be about Him. And so that takes humility. And then he gives us this picture of how the world views he and the other apostles.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this correlation of like, hey, if y'all can't figure out how to employ these things, and he mentions graciousness and blessing and endurance, if you can't employ those things inside the church walls, among the body of believers, the rest of the world's going to discredit everything you have ever done. Like, it's not going to take seriously who you are and what you're saying who you're saying you are.
Yeah.
They're going to see right through it. And I think that's the same message for us, man. It's like we have to be humble with each other, and we have to be humble so that the world can see that. And it's the weakness that we have that sparks this intrigue. It gets noticed by the watching world. So
there was one point yesterday you had said the world's not humble, and so our humility will be shocking to the world around us a lot of times. And I think that's something that's a hard concept to grasp, I think, for most of us, because we live in the world that's not humble. It's hard to want to. It almost seems counterintuitive to seek after humility. Yeah, it's like, isn't that the thing? Like those things don't seem to jive. But as we're seeking after humility, as we're being truly humble, that's shocking to the world around us, because it's the inevitable question will come of, why are you acting like that? Like, what? That's not how other people act. What's going on with you? Yeah. And I think that's the inroad of being effective that Paul's trying to get at. Of like, people don't look at you and go, oh, they're different. People look at you and go, they're just like me. Yeah. Why would I listen to that message that they're trying to convey to me? Yeah,
I totally agree. I think that's we struggle with pride. Yeah. Particularly Westerners, particularly Americans. I'm sure the sin of pride is pervasive.
Yeah, it's a universal thing.
It is universal. But we both, like, we celebrate pride. Yeah. And like, okay, there's a whole month where that's the whole deal. It's called that, and we celebrate those kind of things. But we celebrate, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. I mean, those are things that are ingrained in us from day one. In America, a lot of times is like, that American pride, and that you got to be strong and you can't show your weaknesses.
That's right.
And so when we do something otherwise, it is now it also probably leads to mocking that Paul talks about, because he's like, we're weak to the world and they mock us, and that, and all this kind of stuff. But but it also is things that get noticed, as well.
Well, and he hints at it here, and then when we get to the final section next week, he really draws it out. But he's saying it's not a show of power that's going to draw the world over to Christ. It's our humility. It's the way that we live in kindness and meekness with the world around us that draws people into us. Because, I think the world would say, yeah, you go into any situation and you exert your will over that situation, and then they're going to be convinced to come to your side. And that's not how the gospel works. It's not. That's what Paul's trying to get at here, is that, like, you're coming in with all this arrogance of, I follow this guy, or I follow this guy, or I do this thing, and it's not working. It's not. It is ineffective for the sake of the gospel. And I think that's something that we can really learn from, because, like, your first point yesterday, you said, like the Corinthians, we too are arrogant. And we talked about this last week on the podcast, that the book of Corinthians is like a mirror for us that we hold up and go, oh, yeah, that is me. That is how I look sometimes. And I struggle with those things too. And so I think it's a good reminder for us that, what's the old adage? You catch a lot more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yeah.
And it's a very similar thing here, that like if we're going out trying to beat people over the head with the gospel and use the gospel as a weapon, then it's much less effective than it would be otherwise if we came at it with humility.
Yeah. Well, humility, being humble, is so countercultural, even in Christianity right now.
True.
Very true. A lot of ways, Western Christianity, particularly. The reason I say that is, something happened in COVID, man. Like, we talked about this a lot, but like, we just live in the extremes now.
Yeah.
After that, we live on one side or the other of the pendulum.
There's no moderation in the middle.
During all this time, the right politically has gotten further right, the left has gotten further left. I mean, extremes in a lot of ways. And there's still a middle, but the middle is just further apart, I think, where there used to be moderates, true moderates. Yeah. I'm not sure they exist, or if they do, they're not currently in office, because it's like we live to fight with each other,
right?
And it's not just politically. I really prefer to stay away from all that, especially on something like this. But it's not just in the political world. It's in viewpoints.
Well, it's even like people in our own convention of churches where it's two groups that are squarely in the very conservative end of the spectrum. Calling each other moderates, it's or
centrist,
or centrist, or something like that,
or liberal even,
exactly. It's like, guys, we're all on the same side here,
and so it has in effect that worldly arrogance has seeped into the church, and so we become that same way. And what I don't mean in all this is that we shouldn't have. I don't mean that we shouldn't have theological precision.
Absolutely,
we should. Part of that precision is exactly what we're talking about here. What is being humble? Where's the theology of that? So I'm not talking about that we shouldn't be theologically precise in the teachings, the doctrines that we follow and that we teach. Doctrine is just a big word for the teachings that we have. Specific teachings, specific set of beliefs, systematic beliefs, if you will, like that we've thought out and we know, where we're at on each one. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't have those kind of things, but it does mean that, and doesn't mean that there are probably some times where we should, if we cannot, see if those are, if those are essential kind of things, then we may need to say, we need to part ways. You go do your thing, we'll go do ours. That will eventually, those kind of things will eventually happen. But I'm just saying that we don't need to jump to that. Like, let's find out, can we be unified first? Well,
and I think that there is a way to hold tightly to convictions. In humility.
Yes.
Like, we should have convictions. If we don't, what's the line from Hamilton? Burr, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? Right? So there are things that we need to stand for. But when we stand for those things, you can do it in humility and not in arrogance. And brandishing those convictions as weapons again.
Before he apostatized, Josh Harris was a pastor, wrote some books, and he had either a book or a conference. It may have been both. Maybe it turned into both. I know it was a conference at one point. It was called Humble Orthodoxy.
Yeah, great book.
And I thought it was a great way to describe the way we move forward. Unfortunately, he has deconstructed and is no longer of the faith. But at the time, he was thinking well and thinking rightly about that, and this having this humble orthodoxy. It means that you have orthodox beliefs that you follow that are biblical beliefs. Orthodox just means that they're solid, and they're strong, and like they've kind of been what we've believed for a long time.
They've been tested.
Yeah. Tested. That's a good way to say it. But we hold those humbly, and that's probably where I'm at.
Yeah.
I'm theologically very conservative. Believe in a lot of so much orthodoxy, but I want to be humble in my interactions with other believers first.
Yeah.
And find, like you said, there may be a time where we have to say, I can't go there. So we're a part of a network of local churches, and it's ecumenical. So there's every denomination
Right.
That's involved currently. Well, I don't know if everyone, but a lot of them are in some way or form or fashion. And there's a lot we agree on, and we can participate in those things together. And eventually there's things that we disagree on, and so we wouldn't participate in together, and that's okay. We can draw that line. Honestly, we've been doing that for, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
The conversation really hasn't come up, but like what we disagree on.
What we don't agree
I think
on,
we kind of all know where those lines are, and we just humbly don't approach those.
Yeah. But there's a lot of area to work together.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot of area
and we've been able to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't mean that we're somehow capitulating or something like that to our beliefs. We're holding those strong, and we will hold those strong. There's, I always mess these up. There's a early church father. He said something about you'll be better at it. You probably know it. That like charity in certain things, and unity in certain things. Do you remember?
I do. I know what you're talking about. I don't remember. I can't pull it off the top of my head.
Well,
but I know what you're talking about.
we'll pull that up and talk about it next time.
We'll
give the actual quote next time. But it's this idea that there are certain things that we're going to be together on. Jesus saves. He's the triune God. I mean, just those. There's majors that we're on those, and then there's minors, and then there's even more minor than that we might disagree on.
I think a good example of this is like, say that you do find a brother that is they're of a different stream than you, and it would be it's real easy to take an arrogant approach and say, oh, you believe that? Well, you're an idiot, and let me show you why you're an idiot. Which
those people exist, by the way.
Oh,
in seminary.
Absolutely, they exist. But
you counted them in seminaries.
But Paul is saying here, going, oh, okay,
and online behind keyboards.
Keyboard warriors. Yeah. But Paul is saying here to go that you're going to come up against people that don't believe the same thing as you, and you say, well, okay, I believe this way, and let me help you understand why I believe this way. So we're standing firm on this belief. But there's humility in the way we convey that to other people, as opposed to just immediately dismissing folks and saying, "Wow, you're a complete buffoon for thinking that," and I'm right. So, which those people exist. Yeah. they were in the Corinthian church.
Yes, they were. Yeah.
So.
Oh, you can't speak in tongues? Well, I can. So no.
Yeah. Oh, you follow Paul? Well, I follow Jesus.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Good for you, buddy.
Yes.
Yeah. So then, what would you say then is kind of what's the handle to hold on to then? Like we've had all this talk about humility and arrogance and all those things. So what's the one big takeaway for us from this passage?
Yeah, I think it centers on Paul's talking about. He begins to talk about weakness and how he says we are a spectacle to the world, and he even says to angels and to people. He's talking about himself as an apostle and the other apostles. He's kind of lumping them together. He's talking about, and I think, in a way, Christianity in general, that the world is watching, and we're a spectacle to them. We're something to watch. And it's in this context of weakness and humility, and he's like, hey, you think you're powerful, like you are, and we're not, and you think you're rich, and you are, and we're not, and he's just talking about all that, and it's in that context of that. He talks about being a spectacle to the world. And here's the thing, is that the thing that, and we've already talked about it, the thing that the world notices is humility, because, and here's the handle, humility in our lives is the thing that most identifies us with our suffering, self-sacrificing Savior.
Yeah. Jesus
humbled himself. Philippians 2:5, my favorite description of humility, but it says he didn't count equality with God something to be grasped, and so he emptied himself. He became a servant, put on flesh. He emptied himself of himself. He exuded humility. And the Bible tells us everywhere we're supposed to be like Christ.
Yeah.
So the best way we can be like him is to be humble. Is to empty ourselves of ourselves.
Yeah.
And make Christ the main thing. Like he's the main thing. Like, we talked about theological precision. At some point, like the most important part is like the gospel.
Yeah.
The gospel is how you're saved, and you can learn all the other stuff. You're like, let's don't get into an argument. Let's get you to the gospel first, and then we'll figure out all the other stuff.
Right. Those other things are important.
Yes,
but
they are important.
The thing you need to know is that Jesus is the only way you get saved.
Yeah. So it's just that emptying of ourselves. And the way Paul describes it is that humility, that weakness, that humble nature, that emptying of yourself. It might be our best evangelistic tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's okay to read this scripture and come away with that thought.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So so we have to be humble.
Right.
If we want unity, if we want to be effective as a church, like the church consultant has come in, it's like, you can fix all those other things, but if you're not humble.
Yeah.
And Paul tells us later, 1 Corinthians 13, he says, grace of these is love.
That's right.
You can do all kind of stuff,
ministry's
sake. It's like a noisy gong, clanging cymbal.
That's right.
Without love. So it's that same kind of thing. Jesus said, how will the world will know you? They will know you're my disciples. Not by how boisterous you are, not how powerful your message is, not how streamlined and perfect your services are.
Right.
No, the world will know that you are my disciples by the love you have for one another. Love and humility go hand in hand. You can't love people if you're not humble.
Yeah.
If you're arrogant, there's no room for love. There's no room for anything else because you're full of yourself.
Yeah.
So we have to empty ourselves and be humble. And if we do, we can love each other. We can find unity. And we can be the thing that the watching world sees Jesus displayed in the most. Yeah. So I think that's the handle to all. We got to be humble.
Yeah, that's good.
And we cannot do that on our own.
Right.
Right? I can't be humble. Like, as soon as I start being humble, then I'm going to inadvertently get into pride of like, well, look how humble I am. Look how humble I am. Yeah. So
I'm the most humble
humility
person here.
Is posturing yourself in a place of dependency on the Lord.
Yeah.
I need to clarify this because I talked about my granny's bumper sticker in my message. I talked about, she had one that said, "I'm not perfect, but I'm forgiven." And I like that. My granny knew she was a sinner saved by the grace of God. Yeah. That's very important for us because sometimes we forget. We think we're God's gift to, we're some gift to God that he should use, and it's like, no, he uses us in spite of us. Yeah. But I didn't want to convey in any way that we shouldn't be pursuing righteousness. In fact, humility helps us to do that. Humility is not a place of, I got to try harder to be more humble. Humility is a place of posturing ourselves and saying, God, if you don't help me, I can't do this. Yeah. And consistently, perpetually staying in that state. Yeah. That's what we have to do. We can't try harder. We can't strive harder. We're inevitably going to be like, look at what I did. I'm prideful. It adds to arrogance, adds to pride. But what humility says is that I'm so dependent upon God. God, if you don't go with me, I can't go. If you're not with me, I'm not going to move a step. It's I need you, Lord. I need you in my life, and I need you to help me be unified with my brothers and sisters. I struggle with the group, the Apollos group. God, would you help me to love them and be humble?
Yeah.
So we can't just wake up one day and say, well, I need to be more humble.
Yeah, I'm going to be more humble today.
Yeah, no.
Let me work on that.
No, we must wake up and say, God, I want to be humble because that represents you. That represents my Savior.
But I can't do it by myself. Yeah.
You got to do it. You got to do it for me.
Yeah.
And that's even more humbling. It's
right.
like realizing I'm shot. I don't have a chance unless God's right here with me. So I don't know if that's helpful. It's kind of,
I think it is helpful, yeah.
I think we like to have like those handles, like what can we do,
Yeah. Rely on the Lord.
Nothing. Just rely on Jesus.
That's what we can do.
Just rely on Him. Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, here's where we turn it over to you. What is God speaking to you in your life? Maybe He's shined a spotlight on some areas where you need to rely on Him more in your life, and we'd love to help pray with you through that, walk with you through that. I know. For me, I wrote it down. That humility is the thing that most identifies us with Jesus. It's the thing that really penetrated my heart yesterday, and I think those are great to be reminded of because, it's something that we all have to work on from time to time. So we'd love to have a conversation with you. You can email us at thepath@lafayettefirst.life, and we would love to interact with you. Thank you to the one person who did send an email last week. We appreciate it greatly.
That was awesome.
It was very encouraging. We'd love to get more like that, so please email us, thepath@lafayettefirst.life.
We know someone is listening.
That's right. Next week we'll continue on. We'll finish up chapter 4 of 1 Corinthians next week. But until then, I am Jason.
I'm Derrick.
And we hope you'll join us as we continue down the path.